Hello, welcome to WordPress Accessibility Day. My name is Danielle, and I'm the founder of Overnight Website and Kinetic Iris Web Development Studio. Thank you for joining us for our next session, Digital Accessibility Testing, How to Get It Right, with Tamar Shapira. Since 2014, Tamar has been guiding public and private companies on how to make their spaces, services, and digital offerings inclusive, and she is now building Sense IT to focus on eliminating the gap between those who can and cannot use the internet. Please feel free to add your questions in the Q&A tab next to the video, and we'll answer them at the end of the session and use the ideas section to chat with other attendees. So, Tamar, take it away.
Okay, I'm going to assume so. So first of all, I'd like to thank everyone for joining me. I'm really excited to be speaking on a topic that I'm really passionate about, and I've been researching for over a decade now, but sorry, I think I'm not full screen. Let me just see how. Just a moment. Are we good to go now? Just a moment. My slides seem to be not full screen, so just a moment. Let me see. Okay, my apologies, everyone. Okay, so as I said, I'm very, very excited to be here speaking with you today about a topic that I'm very excited about, and I've been researching. And I think you'll understand more or less where I'm at the more we speak and what I present today. So before I jump into anything, first of all, I don't know why, but I cannot move the slides. So here we go. I guess I'm missing my agenda. Okay, let me tell you a little bit about myself, and then we'll jump into things. Technical problems are always fun, aren't they? Especially when you can't see an audience and facial expressions. So I'll start out by introducing myself. I consider myself a social entrepreneur. I've been doing business and initiating different ideas and solutions for the last 12 years. Everything has an underlying social aspect to it. I consider myself a problem solver and an out-of-the-box thinker. I am a morning person. I love the morning and that lovely, lovely smell outside when the sun just rises. I'm a runner, so you can imagine that when I run in the morning, it's one of my favorite times. And I go by the pronouns she and her, but you'll likely hear me answering to the word Ima, which is Hebrew word for mom, more likely than not. What are we going to be speaking about today? So first of all, I'm going to do about 20 to 30 minute presentation, then we'll open it up for questions. I always like to speak with an audience and answer questions. I think the conversation is a much more comfortable place for all of us to speak of accessibility and testing and the future of and where it goes. So I'm going to give you my take on, first of all, equality and equity, number one. Number two, usability and accessibility. Number three, standard operating procedures. And number four, I'll share with you my thoughts on the future of digital accessibility testing. And you'll also be able to see where I'm at in my journey with Sensit. So again, before I jump into something, my why, and tell you about equality and equity, I didn't mention that I'm the CEO and co-founder of Sensit. And at Sensit, we are changing or revolutionizing the way that we can implement test automation for accessibility differently than what we've done until today, in that we are simulating the user's experience from an accessibility / disability perspective. So without further ado, I'm going to jump right in, and I know you'll have a lot of questions for me because testing and automated and accessibility haven't gone together very smoothly in the last few years, as we probably all know. Before I go into my topic of testing, my why. So this picture, I'm showing a picture on a slide of 3 people overlooking a baseball game. A lot of you probably are familiar with this image, and I just love to present it before I explain my take on accessibility testing, because it frames what where I view, how I view the world and where I'm coming from. So in this image, we have a wall that blocks the crowd, or these three people looking at the baseball game. We have 3 different heights: a tall person, a middle height person, and a shorter person. And they all are standing on, excuse me, on a box to be able to see the game, or a booster, we can call it. So this is a form of equality where we've given everyone the same solution, because we see that there is one person, or rather in this case, there would be 2 people that can't actually see the game from their own height. Now, the solution, as we see here, allowed the tall person and the middle height person to see the game, but the person who's shorter still can't see the game. So we move over to what we call equity, which is allowing everybody to see the game as they can in their perspective, but by giving solutions that are customized, or solutions that are best fit for them. Therefore, in this image, my slides keep jumping, I apologize. In this image, we can see that the tall person doesn't have that booster because he or she can see. The middle height person has 1 booster, and then they can see the game. And the shortest person receives 2 boosters because now they can see the game. So actually, they're all of equal height now that everyone was given their own solution. So this is a great form of offering solutions that would fit a person, and therefore we're seeking equity. Well, when I'm viewing accessibility, and specifically digital accessibility and how I perceive the world, I'd like to remove the systematic barriers. And I believe that this is the best form of accessibility. When we no longer have a wall, but we could put up a fence, and then nobody needs a specific solution or a customized solution. Rather, there are no barriers to stop them from viewing the game, and everyone can see from their own perspective. Oh, and we're jumping. Now, when speaking of accessibility, I always tell people that don't know much about accessibility that accessibility and usability go hand in hand. And why do I say that? Some of you are probably familiar with this, and I'm probably preaching here to the crowd, but I feel that it's important anyway to emphasize this point, that when speaking of accessibility, we're speaking of users that have specific needs, or I'm losing the word. Wow, I just lost the word. Sorry. Sometimes being bilingual affects. Anyway, we'll go back. So accessibility is the use of specifically for people that have disabilities, right? But when we speak about accessibility, we always preach that when you implement accessibility, in essence, you're allowing a more simplified usability for your product. And if you're implementing usability, but you haven't taken into account accessibility, then you're actually missing one part of usability. And therefore, I see a correlation, and I work alongside the correlation between the two. I don't separate them. Be interesting to hear from you if there's anything that you think differently here. If I deep dive, or dive a little deeper into the definition of usability according to the W3C, it states that usability is the extent to which a product can be used by specific users to achieve specific goals effectively, efficiently, and with satisfaction in a specified context of use. Now, if we look at the highlighted, I have a few words here that are highlighted: specified users and specified context of use. If I look at those specifically from an accessibility point of view, then specified users in the definition of usability from an accessibility perspective would include people with a range of disabilities or capabilities, right? Specified context of use would include accessibility considerations such as assistive technologies. And therefore, the two go hand in hand as I see it. I don't feel like I need to go into the WCAG. I'm sure that everyone here is familiar with it. If it's the first time you're hearing of digital accessibility in my presentation here, then I suggest that you find the map by Intopia, the WCAG map by Digital Intopia. I think it outlines the way that the WCAG is formatted in a much more simplified way, so that you can understand when we speak of accessibility testing, how we're approaching it. So it's why this is the reason that I always add this map here, because I think it's a much more effective way to explain to somebody who may not know what accessibility is and what are the guidelines, or where to even begin with accessibility testing. I think this breaks it down very nicely. I continue when I present to people that don't necessarily know what the WCAG is, and I might be assuming that everyone here does know. I break it down according to the map. So we have the 4 principles of the WCAG, and within the four principles are allocated into 3 conformance levels. So oftentimes I hear, yeah, my organization needs WCAG AA and 2.1. Is that what you cover? So I emphasize that if you're looking for AA, which we all know is the more or less the standard, or that average recommendation to make sure that you're conforming to, then one must understand that you have to cover level A, which is our critical criteria, and the AA in order to say that you're conforming to AA guidelines. AAA, as we know, and I'm sure that we've heard it in the last 2 days, is much more strict. Generally, we're talking about federal government and federally funded organizations. It's the highest level of conformance. I would hope that that's where we're going to reach in the near future. But I also understand, and you'll see it later on, that accessibility tends to be something that not a lot of people understand, and they have the motivation to do so, and therefore we need to find a way, a happy medium. What can we require that will remove barriers, but also allow companies, organizations, product owners, website owners to continue building without having to constantly worry that they're not meeting the highest level of conformance. That's the way that I view it. Of course, I break this down into the success criteria so that we can understand that if you have to cover A and AA, then you're actually covering 50 success criteria. I'm always asked the question, well, how much do you cover? We, of course, are in the automated test automation space, and the percent of coverage is something that worries everybody, because if you don't cover 100%, then it's useless. Well, I don't believe that. I believe that what we need to find is a way to test and assess for accessibility that will allow the professionals in our space to do the work of an expert, which is what we call them, subject matter experts. My team, we have subject matter experts, and I see the complexity of what the complex issues that we can solve versus issues that may be able to be solved by test automation, not to cover this 100%, rather to be able to say, okay, we have 50 success criteria. We know that one of them needs 10 tests. Those 10 tests were covered while we were still in pre-production. I hope I haven't lost anyone yet. If it's a little too technical, I'm happy to slow down afterwards and answer your questions. And now my black box. So when I speak to clients or prospects or partners or anybody who wants to understand what we're doing, what digital accessibility is, I like to take the example of the black box, being the box that we don't really know what's inside and we don't really understand it. It's there, and we know that we have to have it in place, but it's kind of, that world that we don't really understand. And I feel like accessibility tends to be that way for a lot of people, in the product teams. If it's product or developers sometimes designers as well, and the QA, quality assurance, I feel like this space tends to be a black box to them. And it's one of the reasons, or at least this is what I like to believe in the way that I'm leading this, that they want to implement accessibility, but they don't really know how to, because it's left in the hands of professionals and experts. So I do feel like accessibility tends to be convoluted. It's complex. Not a lot of people understand what really needs to be done, and they have the motivation to do so. So my suggestion is always to start at the beginning and try to implement some sort of standard operating procedure within an organization that will allude to how a product needs to be tested, assessed, and monitored for accessibility. And this is really the beginning, the baby steps for testing at the end of the day, because I can offer an organization a tool and tell them, use this and cover your accessibility grounds. But that's not really where my tool is going to be most effective. My tool or my product is going to be most effective for an organization that has already implemented the idea of accessibility across the board, meaning the design and development team understand and have some sort of training in place or a program in place for accessibility, some sort of a guideline, not the WCAG, internal policy for what is the expectation. The business stakeholders within the company have buy-in also to these either standard operating procedures or the accessibility programs. And only then do I believe that a testing tool can assist and can support the efforts of the organization. So I always turn to, I call it the standard operating procedure. We can call it guidelines. We can call it standards or policies with internal company policies for accessibility. And then accessibility testing can be implemented and the accessibility can be monitored. And when I speak of organizations or products, I'm referring primarily to web applications in the world of websites, because we are in WordPress day. The websites that I would be referring to are more complex e-commerce sites that have a lot of functionality in them. That's where I come from when I'm viewing or speaking of accessibility testing. And then we'll begin. I hope that was clear for everyone. So I always begin, and now I'm going to give a few criteria or tests that should be implemented pre-production, that we call them the critical mass, before you can even release your product, but that maybe you can do this automatically. This is what we're trying to test at Sensit, and this is what I'm trying to bring to the world. There are critical tests that should be implemented before you release a product. And we understand that there's a way that the manual testing techniques that we've implemented for all these years might be slowing down the release cycles. And therefore, we're coming out with ways that we can implement testing within development, offering that heavy lift of what a manual tester would be doing, in order to assure that there are no barriers initially when released. Doesn't mean that we don't need testing post-release, but the issues that can be found later on are not stopping or barriers to use for people with disabilities. So the first one that I start with is keyboard functionality. And I love this image because I feel like it explains that keyboard functionality is not only addressing the population of people with disabilities, rather, there are people that prefer to use keyboard. There are people or smaller humans that have an easier time using a keyboard. Just like when we speak of the population of people with disabilities, sometimes you can't use the keyboard. Sometimes your functions don't allow you to use, a mouse. Sometimes your functionality doesn't allow you to use a mouse. And therefore, keyboard functionality has to be implemented the same way that we do a mouse. So if I go back to square one, what does that mean? When we have a click of a mouse, we need to make sure that it functions correctly with a keyboard, but not only the function of the the actual element, the button, okay? If you need to press the submit button or click the submit button has to be pressable by the keyboard, but it also has to be, you also have to be able to navigate to and from the keyboard. So how do we test for that? We have to use the product, right? So this is part of what we're doing with the simulator. We're trying to change the behavior of existing functional testing scripts to simulate the way that we would test it from a keyboard functionality, keyboard navigation, keyboard enter perspective as part of these success criteria. So that's number one. If we dive a little bit deeper and we go into this menu, then here we have an example of a drop-down menu. And we can see that we have the icons on top, and I placed the focus on the drop-down menu itself so we could see the items. Well, in this case, we need to make sure that we can navigate to and from that the top menu, open up the drop-down menu, and then we can actually navigate within the menu, right? So that we can reach, let's say, My Nutrition Insights. By the way, this is the Kroger website, if anybody just shopped at Kroger and is and recognizes it. So this is a snippet. It's not to come and show issues, rather it's to just come and show what we are looking for when we speak of keyboard functionality. As you know, you have to be able to go through the entire menu, and then of course you'll see in the next few slides the tests that also have to be implemented, not only to make sure that the keyboard works, but that we have focus and whatnot. So if I take a moment here and I jump over to my suggestions for learning how to test or understanding what needs to be done with assessments, not only by using a tool, and not only by reading the WCAG, but really trying to understand and implement design as a first step within your organization. We always recommend the accessibility design patterns, the APG, that can be found online, the W3C. Created this website where I really think that it speaks to the design and development teams to really understand what needs to be done. I still think there's a lot of information here that may or may not be understood unless someone within an organization is dedicated to accessibility. And yet we still suggest that if you're looking for keyboard functionality and we have the menu bar and buttons, then there's ways to really understand how to implement this from the beginning. And that's why I always recommend clients, whether or not you use our platform or you've decided to manually test every process, turning to the accessibility design guidelines will really, really give you a leverage and a kickstart on making sure that the rest of your elements or the components that you're building will be accessible from the design phases. The next criteria and set of criteria and tests that we speak about are assistive technologies. Of course, keyboard covers the need. It's also an assistive technology from our view. But here we're talking specifically about external technologies such as the infamous screen reader, which behaves in a certain way. And we need to make sure that the product is going to, the expected behavior out of elements will also be utilized or usable by assistive technologies. Therefore, we start with name and role. So if we remember the last, the slide that I showed with the drop-down menu for keyboard functionality, the icons had the name under the labels under them. And that, of course, we can see that I've blacked out the, I've erased, almost blacked out the names to focus here on what we are missing, because technically if a screen reader is navigating through this page, the screen reader will read out what it can pick up. If these icons don't have some sort of a label or some sort of a name implemented, then the screen reader is not going to pick it up. What's more, If I'm not using a screen reader, right, and I'm just using this and I want something that's a little bit more simple to use and understandable, hence accessible, then having these icons doesn't necessarily allude to what they're doing. I have to guess. Now, I think part of the reason that accessibility is not a given has to do with the generation that we're in today, where the digital transformation of the last 20 years has allowed us to raise the next generation to understanding what everything means. 3 dots means it's a menu. A person, somebody that looks like a person, must be your sign-in or your account. If it's a cart, then it must be where all of my my shopping, what the purchases go for. But this is, accessibility doesn't assume. We assume that the user doesn't know, and therefore we want to simplify it. So this is something that I always allude to. And of course, I take everyone back. Oh, I missed a slide. But this is another one that I usually recommend our clients to go back and to read a little bit about name and role and to better understand what can be implemented, of course, with keeping your design in mind. If I move on, focus order tends to be a little bit confusing when I speak to people that don't know accessibility. And that's primarily because a lot of people think that if I've already clicked on the sign-in icon, or pressed on it with my my enter key, and the drop-down menu works, then we're good to go. But you want somebody to navigate through your drop-down menu. How are they going to do that? Well, it's great that you're tabbing through, but if the focus is not being tabbed through and you actually have to use your arrow keys, then this drop-down menu is inaccessible, and you've actually missed the whole point of what you've done with your keyboard navigation. So this is another test that we find that's super critical for product to go through pre-production. It's also something that we've implemented within Sensit, understanding that it's one of the more critical tests that we used to do manually, and we'd like to see that this is just navigating through all elements on a page and able to put the focus, the keyboard can focus on the elements that it needs to. That was a lot of information, and I always love to talk about this. I try to keep it at the higher level rather than go technical. My background, by the way, is not of a subject matter expert. I've learned everything that I've learned through doing and through speaking to people and through reading, and I keep learning. So if there's anything here that you feel that I should expand upon or that I should add to, please, by all means, add it to the comments, and we can or we can discuss it afterwards, and I'm happy to take your thoughts. And finally, if I spoke all this time about Sensit and what I believe that combination between test automation, the world of test automation, and accessibility, I'll give you a little bit of a hint to where I see the future of accessibility testing and what it is that we're trying to do at Sensit, which is really to fill that gap or mind the gap between the test automation that's implemented in organizations to test functionality and performance and security and whatnot, and then what we see as kind of the stepbrother of accessibility. And we no longer want accessibility to be left behind at all. It has to keep up with the speed of development, with the world of DevOps and the cloud and everywhere that technology is going. Accessibility has to be implemented within. It has to be integrated into the development cycle, and a part, I think it's a huge part of product development. I believe that in the future, organizations are going to understand that accessibility positively affects usability, and they will be able to measure the positive ROI that comes from implementing accessibility. However, with that being said, I don't believe that accessibility can be truly measured before it is truly integrated into development. And in a moment, I'll explain to you my view of integrating into the development cycle. But when I speak of integrated, when I speak of accessibility being integrated, I mean that on a high level, the business stakeholders understand that accessibility is an integral part of their organization, digital accessibility, because without it, you're not moving forward. You're not going to be, you're not going to allow your consumers to enjoy or to reap the benefits of what you're offering. Because at the end of the day, accessibility is a growing market, or the population of people with disabilities is a growing population, whether we want to believe it or not, but that's reality. So if I come into what we're trying to do here with Sensit is to really take a traditional development cycle where you can see this is a diagram of a high-level process of development, build. I generally have 2 slides showing that automatic testing comes after build, and then we have manual accessibility testing before release, if at all. And what I'm showing in this diagram is that we are combining, or we're creating a process where automatic testing for accessibility is done simultaneous to automatic testing for mainstream users. And therefore, this is allowing accessibility testing, critical accessibility testing, to be implemented pre-release. Again, this automatic testing for accessibility that we're doing at Sensit is a simulator, so it takes into account keyboard navigation by interacting with the product, which is really not something that we've seen until now. And it's one of the main reasons that I believe this can have a positive effect on what we're trying to do in accessibility, because we won't forego that interactive element of testing. So the whole idea is to come and to change the approach to digital accessibility. I mentioned it in the beginning, where we find that organizations that are mature enough to understand that they need to implement some sort of accessibility program or standard operating procedures for accessibility can accept a platform that can leverage the existing tests that they're already doing and execute them as accessibility tests. They can implement or execute automatic assessments by using a simulator that we have to offer, but also understand that it's not the end of the road. This is not the be-all and end-all for accessibility testing. Rather, it's a really great start for them to release products that have limited barriers or no critical barriers. And then, of course, in the way of technology, we need to make sure that companies will adopt such a tool or such a platform. And therefore, we really need to make sure that accessibility speaks to the non-accessibility professionals or personnel within an organization. And therefore, it needs to be simply integrated into existing processes and simply used, or the way it's set up and then used needs to be something that is not too complex and doesn't disturb the process. So this is part of my research and development. Like I said, I believe accessibility is usability for people with disabilities. Doing this on a continuous basis is only going to ensure that the future of the digital world is in fact accessible, and we don't have any barriers because there's no need. Thank you.
Awesome. Really great job. Thank you so much for the presentation. Just as a reminder, we have the Q&A tab next to the live stream so that you can enter your questions. We do have a few in. The first one is, how much modeling is required for each unit test case? Do you need to specify an entire test path, starting, ending point, etc.?
It's a really great question, Lucy. Thank you. So the idea is to leverage existing tests. You don't have to model and you don't have to recreate any test cases or any scripts. We literally use, right now, and I'm happy to share, we're working with Selenium-based scripts. And of course, we're moving into more frameworks, but it's language agnostic. So really, if you have a script, then you can run it through Sensit, and then we change the behavior in an automatic fashion of the elements so that we can test accessibility. I hope that answers your question, because I'm thinking that maybe you're alluding to something else, but I'm happy to answer more if you have.
Yeah, we'll see if there's a follow-up on that one. Another question, once a product or website goes live, how often do you run maintenance accessibility scans to make sure that everything remains at the same level of compliance? Is that something you build into the process?
Yeah. So what's important so I see it's Lucy. What's important to understand is that we're not a service organization. So I don't offer clients, a number of times or when we're going to run maintenance. What we recommend, and it depends on the size of the organization, is that accessibility is run as often as regression testing is run. It really depends on this, again, the size of the organization, the optimization that they're looking for, because adding accessibility testing, even automatic, will delay some of the testing, because it still takes time. It's different than clicking. You have to navigate through, and the system does run slower than what a generic testing system would run. But we tend to recommend that they do it as often as they can, because then you're going to catch issues faster, fix them. In terms of websites that are more static, I don't think that it needs to be run as much. You can probably do it as much as you either change the content or have a process in place once a quarter or so. But again, it just depends. The more the merrier. It needs to be done all the time, as far as I'm concerned. It's just a matter of when you start, and
So at what sort of size of a company is this a sort of starting from the beginning process? Does this work on sort of existing things that they're now starting to implement a process for testing? Like, when does this type of automated testing work best? Is it like start from scratch, new project? Can you integrate it into something that's already existing?
Yes, it's both. It's both. And when I speak of, so it's easier to speak of such a product with the more mature companies, the largest of enterprises, of the world. But that being said, the future of Sensit and how I see it is that the companies that are like WordPress and Shopify and SAP and Salesforce, all of the frameworks, or the foundations of what we build on, right? Because if we consider ourselves creators, then the creators will have the opportunity to test with Sensit, because Sensit is implemented. It's something that you can continuously test. So it's so, I know that it's very tedious to try to understand how much can we test and what is the minimum that we have to do. And again, it needs to be done all the time. And the more robust, not from a technology perspective, but I mean from a very general perspective, the product that I'm trying to develop will be, and you can cover your grounds, the better we are for the future of accessibility, because we want products to be accessible. It's not only about the minimum compliance.
So do you ever tell a product, website, whatever, to just, wow, this is not good, you really need to start over, versus like fix stuff? Is there like a level where you're like, alert, stop, rethink?
Yeah, oftentimes. So here's what's interesting. If I split the world of digital products into three right now, and there's a lot more, but let's just take three different cases. You have mobile, you have web applications, and you have websites that are more static. They have maybe some functionality, but not very complex. So with web applications, I'm speaking about more complex sites, e-commerce and whatnot. When the cost exceeds, you want to do something, but when your cost is going to exceed the benefit, in that you're testing, but you're not really going to see the return on that, you might as well start over, because it's going to cost you less in the long run. For clients and that's for websites, for clients that are developing web applications, more, complex e-commerce sites, or, any dashboards or things, applications that you're using, there's a lot of functions in it. You can generally fix. It's why digital accessibility is such a wonderful world to be in, because unlike having to add a ramp to a building or an elevator, to fix per se for accessibility. In the digital world, you tend to, you can test it, especially if you could do some automatic testing. You can invest some of the time to fix the elements because of the way technology today is built. That's what we found. We haven't told any one of our clients you have to rebuild your entire, Salesforce application. Rather, let's find critical. Let's have a roadmap for what else you need, and that's the answer. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. So with that, how can a company be sure that the automated tests, this is a question from that was submitted from somebody. How can we be sure that the automated tests are doing what they claim to do? I guess, how do you sort of prove that trust factor? For instance, they say in Africa there's almost no legal framework or a reference that would hold anybody accountable. So if they're spending money, how do you prove that it works? I guess, how do you prove you're trustable?
This is, it's such a great point, because this is where we're coming to. We have countries that are more mature with their regulations, but even so, the maturity level of the regulation may be, or rather the maturity, the regulation might be mature in that you have one implemented, but the enforcement is not implemented. So and nobody's going to do it. Cost is a major issue. There has to be an element of a change of behavior, which is much, much, much harder to implement. I would start somewhere by some sort of example and not trying to reach that perfection level, because there is no such thing in accessibility. Rather, try to hit the more critical barriers and just work the way through. I also know that in Africa, there are many, many initiatives to create or to implement regulation and to try to implement some sort of enforcement. But there's even more of an effort that tries to implement the change of behavior and the understanding that if it's inaccessible, it's just like creating a site that's not usable.
Right. And if you're using a tool that is coming back and saying you're all good, odds are it's probably not right.
Right. So coming back to how do you know that the automated tests are doing what they need to do? First of all, you need to make sure that the automated tests are interacting, which I know is a long shot, and I'm coming and I'm preaching my own, or tooting my own horn, because we don't have such a thing. We're creating it, but there's no automated test that can do what you need to do in order to interact it. Happy to show you what sense it does, but I understand your point. Automated tests are going to cover something, not the heavy lift.
Yeah, there is a question here about if you have a demo of it. We have about 6 or 7 minutes left. So I don't know if you have like a link that they can go to, or a place that they can see, or something, just to sort of see a little bit in the example, see what you're talking about.
Yeah, I'm happy to do it offline so that we don't have to go into the demo and the servers and everything, because it is a techie. We do have a demo. It's not yet available publicly, which is very exciting for 2023. And I take everybody's suggestions. What would somebody want to see? Is it a video, or schedule with us a call to see the demo and really have an explanation? But like, a lot of founders, we're still in that stage where the product is not yet demoable publicly. So I'm happy to do it on the side and show, and go through all the screens and what it does. Because
look you up is cool. The answer. Look you up, hook up on and find you.
I can send you I can send you a URL. To do a video now is it's a little bit useless, because you need to really understand it more techie. But it's a good point.
So I'm a developer. I've never really written automated tests. Is this a tool that I would be able to use? Because I have browser extensions. I have stuff that I can manually do, and I understand it, develop with accessibility. Is this something that I have to know how to, do I have to be familiar with automated testing? And if so, is that something that you sort of offer to help with?
Yeah. It's something that we're toying with at the moment, because what we found is that you do need to have automated tests in place for this to be effective. And yet we have a whole group of people like yourself, developers that are, keep missing the words, either not self-employed, but they're not working within large organizations, or they do, and they're not necessarily connected to specific frameworks and whatnot. And how can we allow this? So the answer is our partnerships. we're now looking into partnerships with those same organizations that may offer, like, I don't know if you're familiar with Selenium IDE, but certain tools where you can actually create tests that are pretty simple that then can be run through Sensit. At this point, the way that the product is built, you can't do something without test automation because it's the way it works best. And we are looking for what kind of model, what can we have as a minimum kind of trial where you don't necessarily need to have the scripts in place. It may not be as effective, but it is something that you could use.
Yeah, or like a library of resources that, here's how you learn about automated testing, and then you can come to us. Because I would love to learn it, but, as some, it's busy clients that, if I have to go and dive into the world of the internet and try to figure it out, I'll just hit the button myself.
Of course. And Danielle, your point is so, on point, because as a startup, you need to focus. And where are we going and what's the target audience? We'd like to hit everyone. What we've focused on is making sure that the accessibility, the level of accessibility and trust, just like someone asked, is at the highest caliber. And we're always taking feedback because I think that we have a lot of, and excuse my term, but snake oil out there. And it's taken us enough time to research and develop and come out with something that really speaks to the accessibility world. And like you said, if it's not simple, it can't be integrated, or it can't be something that a company is going to adopt. We've focused on that as well. And then we have, developers like yourself that we're developing websites and we're working, but we don't do test automation. Mm-hmm. So it's still a question that we're trying to answer with ourselves. Mm-hmm. What is the future of a Sensit for, the mainstream developers?
Mm-hmm. We have a final sort of clarifying question, I think. We do have like 3 minutes, but so Sally says, are you saying that you can implement manual testing into automated testing? I think that it's more side by side, right? You're doing two at once.
Well, we're simulating the way that a user uses. So there are certain manual tests like keyboard navigation. Okay, that's a manual test. You can't test for keyboard navigation without manually navigating through the product. Well, Sensit now can navigate through the product following a specific script. In other words, it would follow through a process. Does it cover all the grounds of a manual tester? Are we coming to replace a manual tester? Absolutely not. Are we allowing organizations to leverage what they already have, test what they're testing, but now for accessibility, which means they're covering what is being covered in mainstream testing, and now they can do for accessibility? Yes, with an asterisk that those same organizations generally have accessibility teams implemented, and they have their own policies and know what else needs to be tested manually and whatnot. We're offering here heavy lifting, but by no means am I coming and saying we replace, rather we're supporting. So I hope that helps. We do have an element of editing within the platform so that if you're running manual tests, you can add those tests or those results within the reports that we generate. I hope that answers it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that clarifies it for me, at least. I think it sounds really awesome. I love the idea of automated testing. I don't know anything about it, but it sounds really cool. And I love sort of the marrying of this really important sort of situation that should be, part of the spine of the internet that is now, being implemented in this way. So I love it.
I love the way you said that, the spine of the internet. Absolutely. Completely. And thank you so much for your time. For everyone, anyone that does want to reach out and see a demo, not a sales demo, really just to understand the product and give feedback, by all means. I don't know if we have my email here, but I'm happy to speak to anyone and everyone.
Yeah, I think if you're on the
I am on the chat.
You're on the chat, and then you have your speaker page on the site, so they'll be able to find you.
Wonderful.
So that's awesome. Thank you so much again, and thank you for attending this session with Tamar Shapira. And you can continue the conversation, like we said, in the chat or on social media using hashtag WPA11Y Day and hashtag WPAD2022. We also appreciate it if you go to wpaccessibility.day/feedback to provide anonymous feedback for our speakers on their presentations. We'd also like to take a quick moment to thank our platinum sponsors. So huge thank you to Cloudways, to Gravity Forms, and WP Engine. We are going to have you stay tuned for our next session, which is accessibility of common Gutenberg blocks, which is coming up next at 7 UTC and 2 a.m. Central. And then while you're waiting, don't forget to visit our sponsors' pages to grab virtual swag, enter for a chance to win great prizes, and we will see you right here after the break.